Revenge of the construction workers. I am a teacher, and when I was younger, I would take summer jobs to supplement my income. One summer, I worked for a bricklayer named Jerry and heard an amazing story. I worked for Jerry in the mid-90s, so the story either happened in the early 90s or in the 80s. Here goes. The setting for the story was a community of small rural towns which had only one brick contractor. Jerry began his career as a bricklayer working for this contractor, a real jerk. Jerk and Jerk's son, adult working the business with his father, would harass, belittle, and humiliate all their employees on a regular basis. No work was ever good enough and employees were told they weren't worth what they were paid. Not only did Jerk mistreat his employees, but he was equally rude to other subcontractors and to the general contractors who hired him. Since he was the only bricklayer in the community, there was nothing anyone could do about it. Needless to say, the turnover rate for the brick business was very high. The only person that stuck with Jerk and company was Jerry. Jerry told me that his father had instilled a self-confidence in him that Jerry could do anything he set his mind to do and that he should not evaluate himself according to what others said, but, rather by the facts. Although Jerry was belittled by Jerk and Son as were all other employees, Jerry was becoming a very good bricklayer. Jerry knew he was good. Jerk knew Jerry was good. But, Jerk didn't know that Jerry knew he was good. Not only was Jerry a good bricklayer, he was very respectful to the boss who disrespected him. Jerk thought that Jerry was a naive pushover who was buying his head games. That would prove to be a huge mistake on his part. One day, Jerry was doing an exceptionally good job of laying brick. Not only was his craftsmanship amazing, he was laying brick at a high rate of speed so that he was making his boss lots of money. Of course, Jerk and Son were belittling his work as though he was doing the very opposite. This scenario was being observed by the general contractor of the project. After work that day, the general contractor asked Jerry to stay behind so he could talk to him. As did every other construction worker in the community, general contractor hated working with Jerk. General contractor told Jerry that he had heard Jerk and Son belittling him, and told him that he disagreed with everything Jerk was saying. He asked Jerry if he had ever considered going into business for himself. Jerry said that he would like to do that someday. General contractor then said that he would loan Jerry the money to buy a mixer, the most expensive piece of equipment needed to start a brick business, if Jerry would indeed start said business. The only hitch was that Jerry would need to pay for the mixer whenever he could and that he would subcontract under general contractor. Jerry agreed to those terms and prepared to begin his new venture. Jerry respectfully told Jerk and Son his plans and gave his notice. The two mocked Jerry ruthlessly and laughed him to scorn. Jerk told Jerry, "You'll be back in 2 months begging to return to your job. You'll never make it as a subcontractor." 2 months later, rather than collapsing as Jerk predicted, Jerry was still in business and going strong. 1 year later, Jerry's business was booming and a drunk Jerk showed up at Jerry's house and begged him to come back to work with Jerk and Son. "Jerry, you're the best employee I ever had." Jerry replied, "Why didn't you ever tell me that when I was working for you?" Jerk couldn't answer the question. And, Jerry obviously didn't accept the offer for employment. 2 years after beginning his entrepreneurial adventure, Jerry heard that Jerk and Son went out of business. Jerry said that he never intended to harm Jerk and Son when he accepted general contractor's offer. He said that looking back on things he realized that he had become Jerk's greatest nightmare. "I can't say that general contractor intended no harm. I thought the most amazing thing about the story was how that Jerry maintained his self-esteem in spite of all the ridicule. I also gained a respect for Jerry's father who instilled an unshakable self-confidence in Jerry." Edit. I contacted Jerry today, after 20 years, to let him know how highly you thought of him. He reminded me that his father was wheelchair-bound and accomplished so much in spite of his handicap. It was his father's overcoming huge obstacles that made Jerk's words seem to be such a minor obstacle to overcome. This reminds me of my business origin story, although I think Jerry is a much more heartwarming character than myself. I went to work as a carpenter for my uncle to learn a trade. He made a lot of promises about how much money I would make and convinced me to move my family from Oregon to California to pursue the opportunity. I made a lot of sacrifices to even get down there in the first place. I took a pay cut to start, that was promised would just be temporary until I got my set of tools, that he would help me acquire, and I lived in a trailer with my pregnant wife, and one-year-old baby. Well, lo and behold, I never got those raises that were promised, and after 3 years of working for my uncle I never did even make it back to the income level one was at previously. I was at $20 an hour at my previous job, and after 3 years as a carpenter with my own tools I was making $18 an hour. My father-in-law is also a contractor, and he came and visited my family. He lived back in Oregon where we were from originally. After seeing the conditions we were living in, inspecting my tool setup, he finally asked me how much I was making. His jaw hit the floor when I told him. He said that amount is an insult and I should quit straight away and move back home. I didn't, but this conversation got my gears turning. I was learning a lot about construction while working for my uncle, but he was the same type of guy where nothing was ever good enough and it was always done too slow and the wrong way. I was constantly berated for little things, and I honestly thought I just wasn't good at being a carpenter, and that's why I wasn't getting my raises. My confidence was at an all-time low. I was, however, very eager to learn. One day I asked my uncle to teach me something new to add to my set of skills. His response was to berate me and tell me I couldn't even figure out the stuff he is already showing me, so how could I possibly pick up something new? This was the last straw. I was already not getting the money I was promised, but at this point when I wasn't even gaining the information to progress, I was finished. I finally quit the next day, moved my family back home, and started looking for a new job as a carpenter. Everywhere I have worked since then treats me like an all-star. I am constantly patted on the back for the good, quality work I do. My first job back here in Oregon started me out at $28 per hour and gave me a raise after my first week on the job. I now run my own business as a general contractor, and I couldn't be happier with my life and my work. I am grateful for the skills I acquired from my uncle, but I am so relieved to be out of the mental and financial nightmare I was living while I was down there. Edit. My uncle's company is still successful, although he is always posting ads on Facebook looking for new employees at $15 an hour. Seems like he still has trouble keeping people. I pay my workers significantly more, and I don't have issues keeping them happy and productive. I learned a lot about what not to do as a boss from my uncle. This story was related to me by my late ex-father-in-law. He was a flooring contractor. Seems there was only one crane/excavator contractor in their neck of the woods. This guy was a drunken idiot who caused all sorts of headaches for the generals. The biggest general decided they had enough of drunken idiot. They offered to bankroll the best people on Drunken Idiot's crew and use them exclusively on their projects. Business boomed and rapidly expanded. Drunken Idiot goes bankrupt and closes up shop. The general knew exactly what he was doing. I worked for a bricklayer for a couple years and a similar thing happened. He kept me paid low and told me he'd give me a raise soon. It was always soon. But not right now. One day I was on the opposite side of a glass block window I was tooling, and I overheard him boasting about me to the other mason on the job site. He was making bank on me and I knew it. I have my notice that day, and he kept calling me for the next 2 years to come back. He even saw some of my jobs I had done and complimented me on them. I went from making $12 per hour with a 1-hour commute to making $35 a square per foot laying cultured stone less than a year later. That year in between I worked for another company who tried to pull the same garbage on me. Finally got the balls to go into business for myself. I agree on this wholeheartedly. I was, if I say so myself, good in building and maintaining websites plus SEO and C. The branch I was working in was getting slow with no real perspective in how it was gonna be a year from then. I started a one-man band to whore out my skills on the side as a safety net, and it picked up quite easy and fast, which I wasn't expecting right away. Long story short, I was bad with planning, which seeped into my quotations and subsequently valuing my work, plus I'd forgotten that I didn't really like working with people directly. Why I had gotten out of retail earlier. So I was very glad business with my employer picked up again, and I closed shop 6 months after I began. Being your own boss sounds enticing and all, but it takes more than just that one skill set to succeed. I have observed the business from the other side. If the guy is the owner and only employee, his customers can prevent him from getting anything done if they continually blow up his phone. There's also the problem that a phone call could be someone wanting a single outlet replaced or a request for bid on all the electrical for a new subdivision going in. Guess which call is going to be returned? Yeah, an old boss of mine managed to do it. But he also had a business degree, so he knew how to handle everything himself. He was basically the best painter in a small town. So if you ever wanted to get something painted, big or small, he'd either handle it himself or knew how to get the employees to do it for him.